Chairman Reese expressed justifiable rage when he described what was happening as a diabolical conspiracy. The conspirators had left little to chance. Those congressional investigations of the early 50s into tax-exempt foundations were mandated by the House of Representatives in a resolution stating, quote, "The committee is authorized and directed to conduct a full and complete investigation to determine which of such foundations and organizations are using their resources for un-American and subversive activities, for political purposes, propaganda, or attempts to influence legislation." Now, folks, I want to tell you, the 3,000 pages of testimony, Reese Committee hearings, is at my son's website, americandeception.com. The person I bought the hearings from, the transcript, was offered 20 years ago any amount of money for that 3,000 pages. The foundations wanted it back. It was the only copy left available. And he would not sell it to them. So my friend sold it to me. My friend knew Norman Dodd very well. He sold it to me for $3,000, which is really cheap. All right, $1 a page. He'd been offered any amount. They said, "We'll pay you anything. You name it, anything. We want that copy." So it's now on the web for everybody to read. All right, now we'll continue. The congressional investigations, right? To determine which of such foundations and organizations are using their resources for un-American and subversive activities, for political purposes, propaganda, or attempts to influence legislation. The tax-exempt status granted to foundations by the Congress of the United States is a special and powerful privilege subsidized by the American taxpayer. Therefore, Congress has not only the authority but also the obligation to investigate how tax-exempt funds are spent. This should be the next investigation. Ron Paul should do this one, after the Federal Reserve. The Ford Foundation, largest of all the foundations, balked when it received a preliminary questionnaire from the Reese Committee. H. Rowan Gaither, president of the multi-billion-dollar foundation, summoned Committee Research Director Dodd to foundation offices in New York City. At the meeting, Gaither asked, "Mr. Dodd, we invited you to come here because we thought that perhaps off the record." You see, that's why it's not in the transcript of the hearings, what I'm reading you now. This was off the record in the office in New York City. "We invited you here because we thought that perhaps off the record you would be kind enough to tell us why the Congress is interested in the operations of foundations such as ours." Gaither answered his own rhetorical question with a startling admission. "Mr. Dodd, all of us here at the policy-making level of the foundation have at one time or another served in the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of the CIA, or the European Economic Administration, operating under directives from the White House. We operate under those same directives. The substance of the directives under which we operate is that we shall use our grant-making power to so alter life in the United States that we can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union." End quote. Stunned, Dodd finally replied, quote, "Why don't you tell the American people what you just told me? And you could save the taxpayers thousands of dollars set aside for this investigation." Gaither responded, "Mr. Dodd, we wouldn't think of doing that." In public, of course, Gaither never admitted what he had revealed in private. However, on numerous public occasions, Norman Dodd repeated what Gaither had said and was neither sued by Gaither nor challenged by the Ford Foundation. The latest article that I've written with Debbie Niwa, a wonderful researcher, a magnificent person and brilliant, did all the graphics and formatting and a lot of her own research as well on change agents and how they brought Americans to have a totally different mindset using all of the sensitivity training. Debbie had some fantastic research of hers is in that article. As well as at the end of writing it, we came across extraordinary quotes from C.S. Lewis, who points out that if you substitute workforce training for education, that's the end of civilization. It's the end of the human being as an entity opposed to being an animal. It's the end of the human soul. It's the end of the conscience. And we have all of the evidence from educators and change agents, articles saying that the computer is fantastic for changing values. An educator with the World Institute for Computer Assisted Instruction, his name is Dustin Houston, where he talks about, won't it be wonderful when the child in the smallest school, most remote area in the country can have the curriculum developed by the world's finest psychologists, and nobody can get between that child and the curriculum. Parents, wake up. That means you, parents, you can't get between the child and that curriculum. You can't control anything anymore. You've lost it. This is going in right now. And they say this works too. What works? I always wondered when I saw this stuff titled What Works in the U.S. Department of Ed, and I didn't pay too much attention. And one day I picked it up, something, and what works? Yeah, dog training works. If you reinforce, if you give rewards and all. And mind you, folks, the rewards are being passed out galore all over our country now, not just in education. In my former town of Bath, the police, the community-oriented policing system, the police are giving rewards to citizens who do good deeds. They give them a little medal. They see them help an older lady across the street who has groceries. The police determine what the good deed is. She gets a medal. That's a reward. That's conditioning. That's operant conditioning. You're going to end up with a society that never does anything for the sake of it being right. And they're never going to take a stand against anything unless it's approved by the government. So that's going to be the result of operant conditioning. It's throughout our community right now. The Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, when he was in Chicago, with the Chicago schools, he even recommended paying students for good grades. Now, that's why teachers are up in arms about merit pay, performance-based pay. That's the same thing. They're going to pay the teachers for students getting good test scores. Now, wait a minute. First of all, you might think that sounds good. No, you got to ask yourself, what's the test? It's hard to believe that anybody would deliberately do this to children, but they are. They're evil people, and their agenda has been evil ever since this book was written. This is it. Proofs of a Conspiracy by John Robison, great Scottish scholar back in 1798. He was a Scottish Freemason, and he went to France and studied, French Orient Masonry, and was so shocked by what he saw, it was so much worse than the Scottish Rite, that he went back and wrote that book, which he actually did give a copy to George Washington. That book is like a global education textbook being used in the American schools right now. It talks about 1798. This is after the French Revolution. Get rid of royalty, get rid of religion, get rid of the family. That's basically what's in the book. They talk about dropping borders. Sounds just like a global ed curriculum. Turning the children against their parents. It's pure communism. That's why I say that now, basically, the only thing that we can do, certainly with education, which is being turned into nothing but corporate school-to-work agenda, using the Soviet-Cuban Polytech system, where they pull the children out, send them over to the cigar factory, at noon to learn how to make cigars. The same thing here. That's being put in. It's been in the works for 30 years. The nail is going in the coffin right now. It's coming out of Europe. It's the program that's going through Maine right now. It's called Reinventing Education. De Lorenzo. This is all in my article, The Death of Free Will. All of this documentation about the final nail in the coffin, which will be school to work across the board for global corporate profits. Our children are nothing but human resources and guinea pigs to be trained like animals. Animal training using Pavlov, Skinner, all of which was brought into the United States by, we'll get onto, the order at Skull and Bones.
Coming soon to PrisonPlanet.tv, part 2 of our in-depth interview with Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt. We will expose the secrets of the Order of Death, publicly known as Skull and Bones. Mrs. Iserbyt's information, obtained from her father and grandfather, who were members of Skull and Bones, was the key intel used in the seminal work by Anthony Sutton on Skull and Bones. In part 2 of this key interview, soon to be released at prisonplanet.tv, she will reveal even more information, some of it never before seen or released. Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the sites, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.